Richard Milhouse Nixon on your left, defeated by John Fitzgerald Kennedy on your right, in the razor-close 1960 presidential election, was talking to one of Kennedy's aides by the name of Ted Sorensen, just after Kennedy gave his inaugural presidential address. And Nixon told Ted Sorensen, "I wish I would have said something that Kennedy said." Sorensen said, "I bet I know what you would have liked to have said. It was probably the part, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," right? That's what you wanted to say, right? Nixon said, "Oh no, that's not it at all." Sorensen said, "Well, what part is it then?" Nixon said, "The part that goes like this: I do solemnly swear to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States of America." Richard Milhouse Nixon wanted what John Fitzgerald Kennedy had. He wanted that desperately, and we have a word for that. What do we call that? Envy. Envy. Maybe you already feel this is how your day is unfolded. You got the apple, and someone else got the Butterfinger. There is a new level of envy going on worldwide. Worldwide. In fact, it's one of the greatest causes of envy about anywhere you go on the planet. Let me give you 3 guesses, 3 hints, so you can guess. So the first hint is that it started in 2004. Greatest cause of envy in the planet. Any guess? Okay, another hint. It has 2 syllables. Okay, another hint. Leading cause of envy. Over 1 billion users are on it worldwide. What am I talking about? Anybody out there? Facebook, right? Facebook. Facebook has brought a new level of envy in our lives. This is how it goes quite often. You're scrolling through your news feed, and you see that person from your high school class who got a C- in Algebra 2. And he just bought himself a brand new BMW. And then you look at the next picture, and it's February in Fort Wayne. That's really important to know. It's February in Fort Wayne. The next picture is a picture of that person from Fort Wayne who's in Hawaii for the 117th time. And then you look at the next picture, and it's still February in Fort Wayne, and there's that perfect family of 5. Down in Florida, of course. And they look so perfect, so happy, so tanned. So everything not my family. Facebook envy. It's all around. Detecting envy can be demanding. Why do I say that? Because we're so used to it. We do it all the time. Detecting envy, though, can be demanding. Defeating envy in all its forms, even Facebook envy, defeating envy can be very difficult. But either you and I detect envy, and either you and I defeat envy, or envy will bring us great despair. Either we address this sin of envy, or envy will bring us its own level of despair and defeat and sadness. And envy, in some cases, if not detected and defeated, will destroy us. Many of you know we're in this summer sermon series on the fourth book of Moses, book of Numbers. Big book, 36 chapters. This weekend we're in chapter 12. Chapter 12 of Numbers, which has one of the most famous narratives in the Bible about people turning green with envy. So let's take a look. How to detect it and defeat it before it destroys us. I'm going to make 2 points today. And the first point is this. We envy when we forget who we are. This is why Aaron and Miriam end up envying Moses, because Aaron and Miriam, they forget who they are in God's eyes. So before we turn to Numbers 12, we need a bit of a running start. And we look at the prophet Micah. God is speaking through the prophet, and this is what he says. I brought you, he's talking to the Israelites, up from the land of Egypt, redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. There they are. They're siblings, okay? So Miriam is the firstborn, and then Aaron, and then the runt of the family is who? Moses. The point I'm making in Micah 6 verse 4 is that all three were necessary for God to what? Bring his people up from the land of Egypt, redeem them with a mighty hand and outstretched arm from the house of slavery. God needed all three. There they are. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. We know God needed Moses, but what about Aaron? Oh, God needed Aaron too. In Exodus chapter 7, we are told that Aaron functions as Moses' prophet. That is to say, Aaron is Moses' spokesperson. Aaron takes what Moses tells him and confronts Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. We couldn't have done it without Aaron. And Aaron, of course, becomes Israel's first high priest. And you know what? We couldn't have done it without Miriam either. We wouldn't know of a Moses if there wasn't a Miriam. Miriam rescued Moses from death in the Nile River when Moses was just a little bit taller than a grasshopper. And Miriam? Oh gosh, we need her. Not only did she rescue Moses from death in the Nile River, Miriam got her tambourine out, and she began dancing when the Israelites came up out of Egypt and were redeemed from the house of slavery. You can read about that in the end of Exodus chapter 15. God needed Aaron and Miriam and Moses. But Aaron and Miriam, they forgot who they were in God's eyes. So that's our running start as we consider the first part of the sermon. We envy when we forget who we are. So now we're ready for the first 2 verses in Numbers 12. While they were at Hatzeroth, remember, the sermon series is called Heading for the Promised Land. They were at Mount Sinai, and they're heading for Canaan, the Promised Land, and they're camping out at your favorite camp out and mine, Hatzeroth. Well, Miriam and Aaron, here it comes, criticized Moses because he had married a Cushite woman. They said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he spoken through us too? They said, big point here, all of the English versions give us they said. The original Hebrew says, she said. What's the big deal? It's not they initially, it's she. It's the older sister. I have an older sister. I understand this. Miriam led the charge. It's not they said, she said. So that explains why later in this narrative, Miriam is judged with leprosy. Aaron, no leprosy. She said. Well, quite often we have a hard time detecting envy in our lives. We're upset about something, we're in conflict with another person, and we don't realize that its root is envy. See, initially, Aaron and Miriam, they didn't see what was really going on. They criticized Moses because he'd married a Cushite woman. His first wife died. Zipporah died. Moses gets remarried, and he marries a black woman, a Cushite. And Aaron and Miriam thinks that's the issue. Oh, no, it's not the issue, right? It's not the presenting issue. Drilling down a little bit deeper, see, the real issue is envy. Most of the time, folks, drill down a little bit and you'll see what's really driving things, and it's probably going to be envy. Here it is. Remember, she said, initially, Aaron just gets on the wagon. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he spoken through us too? That's the issue. Aaron and Miriam wanted what Moses had. What does Moses have? Moses is God's main prophet, Moses' main spokesperson. Why are Aaron and Miriam turning green with envy? Because they want what Moses has. Moses is in a unique position in the Old Testament. In Numbers chapter 12, verse 8, if you caught this when Ben Moeller read our first lesson, Numbers 12, verse 8 tells us that God speaks with Moses face to face. And that's unique, and that's one of a kind. And that's the only person in the Old Testament who has this relationship, talking with God face to face. Imagine that. It's preposterous, therefore, for Aaron and Miriam to insist that God give them the same gifts he gave Moses, because Moses is one of a kind. Moses, he's the one who called down the 10 plagues against the Egyptians. Moses, there's the staff in his left hand. It was Moses' staff who parted the Red Sea. It was Moses, what he has in his right hand, who got the 10 commandments after being on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. It was Moses, when he left the tabernacle, speaking with God face to face, looked like the glory of God. Why are Aaron and Miriam full of envy? Because they forget who they are. Remember, Aaron is Israel's first high priest. He's the only person who gets to go into the Holy of Holies once a year, Leviticus 16, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And Miriam, why, she's called a prophetess. A prophetess, imagine that. Exodus 15, verse 20. But Aaron and Miriam forget who they are. God gave them gifts, powerful gifts, just not the same gifts he gave Moses. God has given you gifts. I know most of you, and I'm amazed at all of the gifts God has given you. It's just that God has not given you the same gifts that he's given other people. I have been wrestling and fighting this verse for 40 years. 40 years. 2 Corinthians 10:12. When they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are not wise. It's the game we play in America, right? We measure ourselves by what others have. We compare ourselves with what others do. And St. Paul says that is not wise. Why is that? Because that is a losing game. Every single time. This is a losing proposition because when we compare and measure, there are always people who have more stuff, always people who have bigger churches, always people who have nicer homes. We will never win. That's why Paul says it's not wise. Loose translation, that's dumb. To play a game you always lose. Stupid, it's idiotic, it's insane. But we all play the game. To compare is to despair. With me on that? If we're caught up in comparing all the time, we are despairing all the time. You want to pine away and die an empty shell of a person, then keep comparing, because you'll keep despairing. We measure and compare in all kinds of ways, don't we? Especially money, right? Money. Married people, though, are envious of single people. Look at all the free time you have. And the single people, well, they envy married people. Look at the joy of family life. People in one job envy the people in another job, though the people in the other job envy people in another job. We envy people's income, lake houses, cars, families, spouses, children, intellect, sense of humor, wit, you name it, we envy it. It's killing us. Really. I know. I'm example A and B and C. In fact, I'll just take the whole alphabet. Aaron and Miriam, they envy because they forget who they are. John Newton, you know the name of John Newton. John Newton composed the most famous Christian hymn ever called Amazing Grace. John Newton didn't forget who he was. In fact, this is what he had placed on his tombstone. John Newton. Amazing Grace, John Newton. Once an infidel and libertine. Those are not nice words. A servant of slaves in Africa, he says, was by the rich mercy of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ preserved, restored, pardoned, and appointed to preach the faith he had long labored to destroy. John Newton never forgot who he was. I can think of no greater strategy to defeat envy than to remember who we are. Think right now who you are. I mean, like right now, think who you are in Jesus Christ. Baptized, precious, honored, loved, forgiven, washed, cleansed. Think who you are right now in Jesus Christ, and think what you will become in Jesus Christ when the Savior returns. What will that look like? Perfect, glorious, in heaven forevermore. We envy because we forget all of this. We forget who we are. We also envy, and this is the second point, when we forget who God is. Who's God? Who's this God that we are meeting today in Numbers chapter 12? Well, verse 2 says about this God, but the Lord heard them. Who's the them? Aaron and Miriam. The God we're talking about hears our envious thoughts. He knows them. He sees them. We can't hide them. This God we're talking about also takes a hard stance against envy. Look at verse 10. As the cloud moved from above the tabernacle, there stood Miriam. Remember? She said, she said. So Miriam gets what? Skin white as snow from leprosy. I won't sing it, but there's a little song that goes by the tune of Yesterday that the Beatles sang. And the lyrics go like this. Leprosy. All my skin is falling off of me. I'm not half the man I used to be. Oh, leprosy is killing me. Leprosy. Your skin is falling off of you. That is a hard line against envy. I mean, Miriam isn't an axe murderer. She didn't rob a bank. She wasn't unfaithful to her spouse. It's just a little envy. Come on, what's the big deal? What I'm about to say is going to be shocking. And you may be tempted to disagree. Though buckle up, here it comes. I practiced this all last week. Here it is. Hard words. Envy is blasphemy. Oh, come on. Last thing, that's way over the top. No, it's not. Envy is blasphemy. Envy is blasphemy because we're telling God, you made a mistake on me. We're telling God that you don't know what you're doing. Envy is blasphemy because we're telling God, God, if you would let me run my life, it would go a whole lot better. We cannot. I can't. You can't. We can't build a life of faith if we doubt God's goodness and wisdom. So when you envy a person, here's what you say. God, in your sovereign wisdom and goodness, you gave that person what you want that person to have. And God, in your sovereign wisdom and goodness, you gave me what you want me to have. 5'8", 140, here I am, God. I'll accept it. I can't build a life of faith. I'm talking about real faith, not pseudo-faith, not fake faith. Real faith. I can't build that if I doubt God's wisdom and goodness. We envy when we forget who this God is. He hears it all, and He judges envious people. But all the more, we resort to envy when we forget that God is the gospel God, the accepting God, the loving God. This is a great verse in Numbers 12, verse 14. Keep her, this is God telling Moses, and the her, of course, is big sister Miriam. She said, Miriam, outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she will be accepted. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. She's not voted off the island. We're not going to keep her in Hatzeroth and just go on without Miriam to the promised land. No, 7 days, and she will be accepted. It's a passive verb. You can see that. A passive verb means God does it all. Miriam doesn't do anything. She will be accepted. That's the God we're talking about. God welcomes sinners. God accepts sinners. God forgives sinners. How? In the book of Numbers, it's always through blood. The blood of bulls and rams, the blood of lambs and goats. And even in Numbers chapter 19, the blood of a red heifer. But Miriam is accepted because of blood. You and I are accepted because of blood. You know this. Christ's blood cleanses, pardons, washes. It's a passive verb. We don't do anything. God does it all. We have a word for that. It's called grace, and John Newton made grace amazing. Aren't you tired of envious when and then thinking? Old people envy young people. Young people sometimes envy old people. Real good athletes envy the super athletes. On and on it goes. Aren't you tired of envious when and then thinking, when I get a bigger plant, then I'll be happy. When we get a bigger house, then we'll be happy. When I get her job, then I'll be happy. When I get a church like that, then I'll be happy. Happiness and joy are not dependent on what we have. Isn't that great? That's awesome news. Joy and happiness, being alive in life, is never dependent on what we have or don't have. Joy and happiness is dependent on who we have. Well, who do we have? Who do we have who empowers us to defeat envy every single time? Every single time. We have Jesus. Let's stand and celebrate that.